welcome to the All Access podcast. I've been looking forward to today for a while. Today we have Haril and Andrea Kazindra with us from Musana. Musana is a group that we just added to our portfolio a couple months ago, back in the fall. And such a unique model, pretty incredible story. And so, I just really want to jump in. Haril and Andrea, whoever wants to lead here on kind of the origin story. I forget when did you guys, what's the timeline? Like, when did you go to Africa, Andrea? When did Musana start? What's the story there?
Yeah, so Musana started in 2008. So we're a little over 16 years old.
Wow.
So the origin story, I grew up in Colorado. And when I was in university, was studying business, and a lot of college kids, was really confused. I always, had grown up in a Christian home and was told to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but I also loved business. And I was struggling to understand how they relate with each other, and then was introduced to the concept of microfinance, which is using, small loans to lift the poorest people in the world out of poverty. And I got so excited, and so signed up for an internship in Uganda. And then a good friend and my sister ended up joining me. And shortly after we got to Uganda, we were placed in an orphanage where kids were just living in the worst conditions you could imagine, right? Sleeping on dirt floors and starving and being abused physically, emotionally, sexually. And basically came to learn that the kids were kept in these conditions for a reason, to attract outside funders or donors or people that would come to the community. They would take them there and show them how the kids were living, and people would leave and send money that would never reach the kids. And so ended up making a decision to stay and trying to close that orphanage. Around that time, I met Haril, and he was young entrepreneur, also 20 years old. And he started just helping me. And Sally and Leah came back to Colorado, started fundraising, and we ended up taking on 80 kids and starting what we called Musana Children's Home. So, at 20, we had both just turned 21 years old and became legal guardians of 80 kids. So since then, after that, we learned a lot of lessons, made every mistake you could possibly make. And probably the greatest lesson we learned was that the last thing the community needed was another orphanage. We actually learned that about 80% of the kids that we had become legal guardians of had living parents, and they just felt trapped and couldn't provide for their kids and wanted a better opportunity. And so we began to shift Musana, and in 2011 became a community development organization. And one of the things we learned early on was the importance of local ownership and sustainability, and starting things that the community could sustain from within. So Haril can talk more about what Musana is today, but as much as Musana has a powerful beginning, what we want people to understand is what is taking place in Uganda today is so unique because of how involved and how much ownership the community has. So sometimes I get hesitant to even share the origin story because I don't want it to take away from what the Ugandan people are doing for their community.
Yeah. So tell us what did that transition look like to local ownership, and kind of the origin story of the Musana model of what was it like setting that up? And I just want to hear your thought processes there as you were going through it live. And when was that? Like, what year? You said 2008 was Musana? Okay.
Yeah, 2008 was when the children's home started, and then we transitioned to a community development organization in 2011.
2011. So when you say community development organization, I mean, I hear that thrown around all the time, but what you guys are doing is definitely unique.
Yeah.
What was that when you were setting it up, I guess I should say, what was that process like? And specifically your model?
Yeah, if I can speak into that, it was one day at a time and learning at a time. Everything didn't happen at once, that this was really the shift and, this is what we're going to do. There was a lot of learning that happened in that time. But one thing that I want to bring up is one, knowing exactly what we wanted for the community, most especially the vision we envisioned for the community. Seeing that we rescued these children who were in despair and in desperate need for any support and under different kind of abuse was one thing. And we thought by rescuing them to start a children's home, they have met their heaven. But, uncovering the stories behind why they were in this place and knowing that there was also a lot of lies and attributed to impact of aid into some of these communities. This is when we said, okay, the approach we're trying to use is not the approach that is going to work. We need an approach that can completely transform this community. And that's where the transformation happens, to say, okay, we need to break these cycles of dependency, most especially on any outside support or aid, but build a community that is resilient and that has dignity and value into their lives. And we looked at the core problems within the community, which is the root cause is poverty. People are poor, so they end up on relying on outside support and creating stories sometimes that are not true. So with that, we said we are going to have an holistic approach model, which we believe can impact, the community in general and not one sector, not one area of an impact, but an holistic model. So that's where we focused on developing a model that looks at using social enterprise as the catalyst for change into this community, focusing in areas of education, health, and economic growth or empowerment within the communities. So that's how Musana got to transform, and we started working on, that approach within the communities to where we are today.
Got it. So social enterprises, meaning these are for-profit businesses or, self-sustaining businesses, right?
Yeah, and of course, these are businesses that are for the social good, because we put people at the forefront, at this, not ideally looking at it as a business of making money, making profits, in that kind of a way, something that is very impactful and transformational. So look at education. This was really crippled, most especially in the areas that we survey. And by coming in, us starting schools right now, running 8 schools in the community, has been very transformational, not only for the schools we run, but really transforming the education space in the communities that we serve. We have been a beacon of learning within other education sectors in the community, but as well as running them sustainably, to say that they can generate their own operational resources or incomes, to the point that they end up even being more profitable to support the most needed, needs within the communities that they are in, offering more scholarships and bursaries to the most vulnerable children in the community. So this has been something that has been very amazing. Still in health, where we have built hospitals to reach out to the need of healthcare within the communities, but as well as being a very sustainable model. We have created jobs within the community through building of hotels and restaurants and, training centers for trade skills. People are now more skilled to earn a living and put food on the table for their families. And this is the kind of transformation that we are talking about.
Yeah, and I love the idea of using the profits for to pour back into the community. I remember when you guys were in Dallas a few months ago, sharing that with us on, just the idea, because I love the idea of taking care of the things around you, and helping Ugandans, empowering Ugandans to be the change agents in their own community, and so building a sustainable model, and using donations as investments, right? I mean, that's what
Yeah.
you guys
Yeah.
do. I mean, what was I'm sure you guys got feedback on that when y'all were wrestling through that. I mean, what were people saying on how's that going to work? I'm sure people were saying that's not going to be sustainable. What was that process like?
I mean, it was a hard process, but one of the things I think we put at the forefront was a really passion and belief that this is something doable. And like Andrea mentioned, coming from the background where we had a business mindset, it was something that very key and profound for the work to happen. And this took time, not only educating the local people, because these are people who are dependent on charity, a handout, someone to support them. And we're saying, no, you have to work and support your own community. We have to do it together. But also educating in the space of people that give the funding, that this is a model that can actually work. We can use a social enterprise model to change the communities. And because most people lack the knowledge of how people live there, they always end up saying, how can this be? These people cannot do anything, cannot afford, cannot sustain themselves. These people need help. But we have moved in this space and every day proving that this is something that is doable and it is scalable within communities. Communities can actually be empowered. The communities have the potential to run social enterprises successfully and generate profits that they can plow back to meet their own problems. So this is something that has already happened and on a larger scale. And we have seen many more other people learning the model. And we have seen a big shift actually in the space as well, where people start looking at social enterprise as a way how we can transform and change communities that are living in poverty spaces. So it has been a long journey. It has been 16 years and we're still growing. I mean, I know there are other places where people can struggle a lot, but this is something that can work anywhere if people are willing and capable to take ownership, and there is skilled people that are willing to be the agents of change. And that's what you mentioned. If we don't find agents of change within the communities, this is where things can be harder. But the agents of change, if they are there, change will actually happen in these communities. They just need people like you, Len, and us to walk alongside them,
And believe in them.
and believe in them that they can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what we're always learning as well, how do we minimize harm? How do we maximize impact? And, but there's a compounding effect of using donations as investments in, capital projects that can sustain themselves. What's that compounding effect like? I mean, I guess, how many years does it take to usually get something to sustainability? And then beyond that, I guess, how are you able to pour back into community through scholarships? I just want to hear some of the numbers behind that, just to get the scale of what that compounding effect is like, right? Because you think about compared to a compassion where you have to, compassion, but sponsor sponsor a kid year to year to year to year. Whereas here, I think we did the math and it was like $48 around there. Helps one kid gain access to a year's worth of high quality education. So over 10 years, that's $480 as opposed to, I mean, if $43 a month sponsoring a kid versus $48 for the year, I mean, that's pretty incredible because it's compounded. And yeah, I'd love to hear more on the numbers on your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we get asked a lot about a lot of people sponsor kids, for example, and it's great. Like, I mean, how many kids in Africa are being educated because of sponsors, and that's amazing, and people should feel really good about that. And we actually started with a sponsorship model, and we decided to turn away from that because of the challenges we were having with creating local ownership and buy-in when you have a model that is just dependent on, sponsors every month to to support the budget. So yeah, I think, what we've decided is, what if we were to repurpose donations, right? So instead of covering operations, can they build infrastructure, right, for enterprises that are going to be owned and sustained by the local community, and profits are going to be generated, and then those profits can provide the scholarships. So yeah, really, when you give to Musana, you're giving double, right? You're giving to the infrastructure, and then that infrastructure is going to generate more, that is going to cover more impact. So, in the poorest communities of the world, we're generating, this 2024, we ended with about $3.5 million of local revenue. And about our total operating budget was 97% sustainable, but that's with almost $600,000 going into scholarships and free health services. So our enterprises are more than self-sustaining, and they're actually supporting the charity component of the organization. And so it's just a multiplier effect, right? We're creating quality and affordable education and healthcare and meaningful jobs and skilling people. And then at the same time, generating additional resources to cover the greatest needs in the community.
Yeah. And the most wonderful thing about that, Lenny, is, is knowing that this is something done locally. You have invested and they can do it. Not only today, where investment goes in today, but you have invested them today and you can walk away, and for generations they are going to support themselves, and not only supporting themselves like supporting the most vulnerable within their communities, but they are also making an impact, like, educating their community in their best knowledge, their best values that they know of, and providing healthcare and creating employment within their own people. And just because you believed and trusted them to invest, what makes it very different with the traditional model of where we sponsor, it is tight, it becomes more dependent, it becomes, it doesn't break free of someone to become more self-reliant. So you will find that more kids are coming and more are dependent on that aid, and the community itself does not know how to support that. With this kind of model, the community get to know how they can support their most vulnerable people in that kind of a sense. And that's why we love this model so much. And we believe it's one way communities can actually shift and transform, because they get to learn, they get to understand the problems, they get to actually feel what it feels to support their most vulnerable people than leaving it to outside support.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that on the outreach side. So using the profits for outreach, because, obviously there are some that live below that poverty line where still paying for services is hard. So what is that like? If I were boots on the ground, there with you guys right now, what would that outreach look like? And how have you guys seen it kind of transform the, Ugandan helping Ugandan, transform the, I guess, perspective might be the right word on who's helping who?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. The outreach model has been something very wonderful, because it brings communities together, more connected and more resilient together. In this case, they have not lost hope there, because when you're depending on outside support, there is kind of lost hope that I can only survive if an external person really comes and help me.
Right.
But when your own community is there for you, there is hope. there is dignity, there is value, there is connection. And that is something very powerful, because as people become more connected and more understanding of their societies, what problems and what are the opportunities there, they grow much faster than you could ever think, because there is so much power into that than on reliancy. And that's one thing that you'll see. Right now, Musana has grown very fast. If we're still a children's home, would barely have even 200 kids in our schools, or 300 kids. But right now we have 5,000 kids going to school every day. And so far we have had over 7,000 plus that have gone through Musana education. Some have already been employed, they are getting jobs, they are, supporting their family and telling these testimonies to the community. So there is trust, there is bond and hope, most especially, that no, this is something that can actually happen under our nose than waiting outside support to come in. So we see that scalable, growing faster than you can ever imagine. And most especially, those who are in despair, they don't lose hope that my community cannot support me. I'm going to really wait for a Muzungu, that's what we describe a white person, to come in my community so that I can cry my problems. Right now, they can share their problems with one another and say, no, we can support you. We can be there for you. And our culture is very communal and very generous. So once that power is there, it moves very fast in that kind of a sense. I don't know, Andrea, if there's something on add on to that.
Yeah, no, I think he said it. I mean, I think we've looked at charity one way, right? We've looked at philanthropy as in we have to do for people, right? We have to provide for, and instead of what if we use it as an investment and believe in the capability of the local people and the resources that they can generate locally. And so it's exciting because for us, it took 10 years. I mean, from 2008 to 2018, we were trying to prove that this was possible. And in 2018, in the community we started in Uganda, we had built schools and a hospital and a restaurant and a hotel and a skills training center, and we're giving all these scholarships, and it reached sustainability. And we're like, oh my gosh, like this is possible. Like communities can have quality and affordable services and sustain them and have meaningful employment. And microeconomies can be created, and they can be uplifted, and without any outside funding ever coming in again to support it. And so, 2018, we're like, let's do it again. For then, we started in 2 new districts, Kaliro and Kamuli. And this year, 2024, I mean, Kaliro is already over 100% self-sustaining, right? Operating, and this is year 3. And not needing any outside support. And Kamuli is 90% sustainable, right? And so it's like, it's happening. And it's really, really exciting to see how donations can be used for something that the community is truly going to own, sustain, and multiply.
Yeah. Yeah. And these are, I'm glad you brought up the high quality and affordable, because it seems like 2 different things, and but that's something you guys have pulled off. I mean, I've seen your facilities are really sharp, and I've looked at the data reports on what your hospitals are doing, and these are, I mean, full-on hospitals. So what was that when you guys were thinking through this process of choosing, because you're trying to reach sustainability, but you also want to provide high-quality services, but you also want to make it affordable. I mean, putting all those pieces together, is there something I'm missing on, or what was it that clicked locally that made that possible? Was it because they were high quality, people were willing to pay for it, and because they're higher quality, you also lengthen that runway on when you have to do more expenses on maintenance? What was how did you guys land on high quality?
Yeah, it's a very good question and a very challenging one. And high quality can be relative in nature. but we are looking in the context of the communities that we live in. And we are looking at the comparison. We have had people in these poor communities, some people that have been able to have an income where they can afford to take their kids to school, maybe access some health care, and yet these communities do not have that quality service. So what happens? They end up sending their children and their sick patients outside their community. They travel distances to find a better school because they want a good future for their children. They are traveling long distances, and end up not making it because they were seeking for good health care, because it's not there in their communities. And whoever is starting up something in similar, it is not quality enough, and sometimes it becomes exploitative to the community. And you find that there is a gap. This is a poor community that needs support and service, but there are also people who are taking their children, going somewhere else to seek services. And you see a gap. And that is the gap we are feeling, whereby we are saying you do not need to travel to get out of your community to go and look for a decent education or decent healthcare or quality healthcare. We're going to find means to provide that for your community. And we're going to make it affordable for you. Actually, for some people, they have actually said, you have subsidized the cost because the money I've been using for transport is probably what you're charging before I go even pay bills where I'm going. So you find that some people are extremely very happy. The quality is high and yet very affordable. And we have gotten a chance to support those who can't even afford to access the service, but accessing the same quality service within their own spaces. So you find both parties are happy. The same with the schools. And actually what happens is the reverse. People from outside then start coming in to access the service in this poor community. You cannot believe it. We are in upcountry, Iganga, Karido, very poor community. And you find someone coming from a city like Jinja, Kampala, coming to access education in our school. What does that tell you? There is something we are doing very unique that they are not actually finding even in the cities, that they're accessing. Of course, such initiatives take a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of patience to be able to execute. And we have attracted many to come into these communities, and that's how communities grow. Start something good that can attract corporates, that can attract people who can afford. It's an essential service, and communities will start growing. Jobs will start being created, and you create an economy within this community. Then what are you doing at the end of the day? You're eradicating or reducing poverty levels within this community.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I'm really excited about, because I know you guys are working on, doing baseline inline surveys, and I'm eager to see the results of those of how do these social enterprises reduce, what's the compounding effect outside of the schools, outside of the hospitals, on reducing poverty levels in these areas. So I guess it makes sense. The more you invest in the infrastructure, the longer that runway is on how long that infrastructure can provide. And because those capital investments, if I think about like building a building here and running a business, you have building the building costs, and then you have operating costs. Well, the donors have used their donations to cover that building cost. So the operating cost is significantly less, which makes it affordable. And then you're driving competition, which I love markets and, good old fashioned supply and demand in the nonprofit space. But you're driving competition up in the areas of, if there are other schools in the area, if they want students, then we need to compete with the quality of education of Musana. So it reminds me of, I was in South Sudan, I guess a couple of years ago, and I was in this I went to visit this clinic nearby. It was, I guess you call it a hospital, but every big organization you can think of, USAID, I won't name others, but they had their logo all over this crappy hospital, and it was just, I don't know, like cheap, and we'll probably need more funding next year and the year after that. And so it makes me really appreciate what you guys, having seen that in person, makes me appreciate what you guys are doing. I want to touch on a couple other things that are interesting. One is the replication that you guys are doing over the next, 7 years? But Andrea, I want to go back to something you said earlier, because it resonated deeply with some of my experience in Haiti, was your experience with the orphanage, of funders having no idea about what was really happening. And that's a huge problem I see all the time. Like, we just don't know what's truly happening. And that's why we started All Access, was because we needed somebody to help facilitate that. So, I mean, what's the fix? How do we fix that? How do we fix the, funders really not knowing what they're funding, or that dependency on aid? I mean, that's probably a loaded question, but I mean, if you want to give it a whirl, go for it.
I mean, I think we have to stop funding things that are going to just create more dependency, right? So, for example, like orphanages. I mean, we know that 70%, 80% of kids in orphanages across the world are not true orphans, right? So why are they there? Because donors like orphanages, right? It's attractive. And so I think now there's this mindset in these poor communities that, what problem can I create to attract funding, right? And so it's not solution focused, right? And so I think we need to just be more diligent about what we're funding, what questions are we asking, what accountability are we asking for. I mean, that's what I love about All Access, is you're just kind of doing it for the donor. You're doing the homework that donors need to do, because we are contributing to the problems, right? We're contributing by giving to the things that are attractive to us, right? We're just continuing this dependency mentality and this paternalistic thinking that these people need us, instead of giving to things that are truly going to have the outputs and outcomes that are going to drive growth and development in communities. And so I think that's really important. I mean, I think that it's, funding locally led programs, I think, is really essential. I think things that are on the ground that are envisioned and run by locals are always going to be more effective and more efficient. I just believe that. And so finding those organizations is, because they don't always have the connections that a lot of the big international organizations have, I think is going to be a challenge going into the future for the philanthropic world. How do we find the people that are going to make the biggest difference in their own communities? How do we find them, right? Your whole thing, how do you make them findable and fundable? Because I think most of the really impactful organizations right now that are led by locals are not seen. And being on the ground and seeing so many organizations come and go and so much funding come into communities, and yet there's no sustainability or long-term impact. There's so much that funding can do. There's so much that philanthropy can do. There's so much that social capital can do. And we just need to be more diligent. And I don't know, I could go on and on about this, but yeah, it's Liz. I mean, Lane, I tell you this, but I love All Access because I just think you're doing it right. And I really am excited about the future of philanthropy with organizations like yours and funds like yours coming up.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's both ways. I mean, we're just a service trying to find groups like Musana, and it's a market. So whoever can best, help Ugandans lift themselves out of extreme poverty kind of gets the bid. And if that can be the market driving factor, we'll get organizations, instead of based off what's the most flashiest fundraiser or this or that, it'd be driven by who can actually best impact this community and improve it. And so that's our hope, at least.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the replication, what you guys are up to next. Fill us in there.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Like Andrea tried to point out, that we have replicated in 2 communities, Kalido and Kamoli, and so far being very successful. Actually, we look at our, indicators in terms of impact, the provision of service, income levels. They are doing very well, being more sustainable. So right now we are looking out in 2 new other communities in Uganda that we're going to be working on now this year, and that is Yuge and Budaka districts. So these are still very poor districts in Uganda that are struggling with a lot of these essential services, creation of jobs and employment, empowering people, lifting them out of poverty. So we're really excited to see how this goes. And we have a very ambitious goal, of course, to see that we can be in so many other communities, as well as in Uganda and outside Uganda.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we love it. And we're tracking right along with you guys. Thank y'all for taking the time to share. We have if you're listening, we have a page on our website with more on this replication that All Access members are coming alongside. And there's a video there. You can learn more about what Musana is doing. But I appreciate you guys doing the hard work, being on the ground. We're here for you guys. We're praying for you. And I appreciate you taking time to join the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Lane. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. I'll see you soon.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.